The dust had turned everything the color of old bones, and Sarah Mitchell knelt in what used to be her vegetable garden, tears cutting clean tracks down her dirt-smudged cheeks as she pulled another withered tomato plant from the cracked earth. The summer of 1882 had brought the worst drought New Mexico Territory had seen in 20 years, and now in late September, her carefully tended garden lay dead despite every bucket of precious water she had hauled from the creek a half-mile away. She was 23 years old, a widow of 8 months, and this garden had been her lifeline, the thing that kept her from losing the small homestead her husband Thomas had died protecting from cattle rustlers last winter. She did not hear the horse approach until it was nearly upon her, and when she looked up, shading her red eyes against the brutal sun, she saw a tall cowboy sitting astride a paint horse, watching her with an expression that was neither pity nor judgment but something closer to understanding. He was young, probably no more than 25, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore dusty chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. A coil of rope hung from his saddle, and she noticed his hands were work-roughened, the hands of a man who knew hard labor. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Name is Jacob Wilder. I have been riding fence line for the Double R Ranch about 5 miles east. Could not help but notice your situation here." Sarah stood quickly, wiping at her face with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment by a stranger. "I am fine, thank you, just having a moment of foolishness. The garden is beyond saving." Jacob dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot, and he walked to the edge of her garden plot, kneeling down to take a handful of the dry earth and let it sift through his fingers. "This soil is played out," he said quietly. "But that does not mean you cannot have a garden, just means you need to start fresh in a different spot." She stared at him, confused. "I do not understand. This is the only flat ground near the house that gets good sun." He stood and walked past her small adobe house, studying the land with an assessing eye. "There," he said, pointing to a spot about 30 yards from her current garden, where the land sloped gently down toward a natural depression. "That low ground there will hold moisture better. And see those cottonwoods? Their roots run deep, which means water is closer to the surface in that area. If we plow that ground and amend it proper, you could have a garden that would produce into November if this weather holds." Sarah followed his gaze, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. "I cannot plow that ground," she said softly. "I do not have a plow horse anymore. I had to sell Bess last month to pay the land taxes." Jacob looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "I have a day off tomorrow," he said. "The Double R has a plow I could borrow and my horse is strong enough to pull it. If you would allow me, I would be happy to break that ground for you." "Why would you do that?" The question came out sharper than she intended, defensive. She had learned in the months since Thomas died that men rarely did things out of pure kindness, especially not for a woman alone. "Because I know what it is like to watch something you worked hard for die," he said simply. "And because it is the right thing to do." She studied his face, looking for deception or ulterior motive, but found only sincerity. "I cannot pay you. I am not asking for payment." He swung back up onto his horse. "I will be here tomorrow morning early before the heat sets in. If you want to tell me no, that is your right. But I will come regardless, and you can decide then." He rode away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the ruins of her dead garden, hope and suspicion warring in her chest. That night, Sarah lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the coyotes singing in the hills and thinking about the cowboy with the kind eyes. She told herself she was a fool to trust him, that he would not come tomorrow, or worse, that he would come with expectations she was not prepared to meet. But another part of her, the part that had been slowly suffocating under the weight of loneliness and failure, desperately wanted to believe that someone might help her without wanting something in return. He arrived just after dawn, riding a different horse this time, a big roan gelding, and leading another horse that pulled a borrowed plow. Sarah had been up for an hour, had made coffee and biscuits, and now she stepped out onto her small porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "You came," she said, and heard the surprise in her own voice. "I said I would." He dismounted and accepted the cup of coffee she offered, drinking it black and hot despite the warmth already building in the air. "That is mighty fine coffee, ma'am, thank you." "Sarah," she said. "You can call me Sarah if you are going to be working my land." "Sarah," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice, gentle and respectful. "And you can call me Jacob, or Jake if you prefer." They walked together to the spot he had indicated the day before, and he explained his thinking as he went, pointing out the subtle signs in the landscape that spoke of water and good drainage. Sarah found herself fascinated not just by his knowledge, but by the way he shared it, not talking down to her but teaching her as if her understanding mattered. "My father was a farmer in Missouri before the war," Jacob said as he began to hitch the horse to the plow. "He taught me to read the land, to see what it was telling you if you paid attention. When he died at Shiloh, I was 14. My mother tried to keep the farm going, but after she passed 2 years later, I sold it and came west. Have been cowboying ever since, but I still remember everything he taught me." "I am sorry about your parents," Sarah said softly. "That must have been terribly hard. It was a long time ago." He adjusted the plow harness and took up the reins. "But you never really stop missing them, do you? The people you love." She thought of Thomas, of the way he used to sing while he worked, slightly off-key but full of enthusiasm. "No," she agreed, "you do not." Jacob began to plow, and Sarah watched as the blade bit into the earth, turning over soil that was darker and richer than what lay in her dead garden. The work was hard and hot, and after an hour she brought him more water and insisted he rest in the shade of the cottonwoods. He did not argue, and she noticed the way his shirt stuck to his back with sweat, the play of muscles in his shoulders and arms. "Tell me about your husband," Jacob said as he drank deeply from the dipper. "If you do not mind talking about him." Sarah sat down on the ground nearby, drawing her knees up and wrapping her arms around them. "Thomas was a good man, a dreamer. He wanted to build something here, a real ranch with cattle and horses, but he was not cut out for the violence that sometimes comes with this territory. When those rustlers came, he tried to stop them and they shot him. By the time I found him, he was already gone." "That is a heavy thing to carry," Jacob said quietly. "Some days it feels like I will break under the weight of it," she admitted. "Other days, I wake up angry that he left me here alone to figure everything out. Then I feel guilty for being angry at a dead man." "Grief is not a straight line," Jacob said. "It is all twisted up with love and anger and regret and 100 other things. You are allowed to feel all of it." She looked at him with new appreciation. "You sound like you speak from experience." "I loved a girl once back in Missouri before I came west," he said, staring out at the land. "She died of fever the winter before my mother passed. I was angry at her for a long time for leaving me, even though I knew it made no sense. But feelings do not always follow sense." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Jacob stood and went back to plowing. Sarah retrieved her own tools and began pulling rocks from the newly turned soil, piling them at the edge of what would become her new garden. They worked together through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm that required no words. By noon, Jacob had plowed a plot twice the size of her original garden, and Sarah had cleared a good portion of it of rocks and debris. He unhitched the plow horse and led both animals to her small corral, where he gave them water and let them rest in the shade. "You should have lunch," Sarah said. "I made extra." They sat on her porch and ate beans and cornbread, and Sarah found herself talking more freely than she had in months, telling him about her life before Thomas died, about her dreams for the homestead, about her fears that she would lose everything her husband had worked for. Jacob listened with his full attention, asking questions that showed he was really hearing her. "This land is yours free and clear?" he asked. As long as I can pay the taxes and prove I am working it, she said. But that is getting harder. I sold what cattle we had to get through last winter. The chickens barely lay anymore because it is so dry. I have been doing laundry and mending for some of the ranch hands in the area to earn a little cash, but it is not much. Jacob was quiet for a moment, turning his tin cup in his hands. What if you had a producing garden again? Could you sell the vegetables? The mercantile in town would buy them, Sarah said, and some of the bigger ranches that do not keep gardens, but I would need seeds and good ones are not cheap. I have an idea about that, Jacob said, but first we need to finish preparing this ground. Do you have any manure from your chickens or old hay? Some, she said, confused. Not much. We need to amend this soil, give it nutrients. I will bring some aged manure from the Double R tomorrow. The ranch has more than they know what to do with, and I know where we can get seeds. Jacob, I cannot accept all this help without giving you something in return, Sarah protested. It does not feel right. He looked at her steadily. You gave me lunch, you gave me your company and your conversation, that is more than enough. Besides, he added with a small smile, I am enjoying myself. It has been a long time since I did this kind of work, and I had forgotten how satisfying it is to make something grow. Over the next week, Jacob came every morning before his work at the Double R and every evening after. He brought manure and worked it into the soil. He brought a bag of seeds he had purchased with his own wages, refusing to let Sarah pay him back. He built a simple irrigation system using salvaged wood and old tin, creating shallow channels that would direct water from the creek to the garden with minimal effort. Sarah worked alongside him every step of the way, learning and asking questions. She found herself looking forward to his arrivals with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the garden, and everything to do with the way he made her feel seen and valued. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation ranging from childhood memories to philosophy to the practical concerns of survival in the harsh New Mexico territory. One evening, as they worked side by side planting seeds in carefully spaced rows, Sarah realized she was happy. The recognition startled her so much that she stopped working, her hands full of dark soil, and just stared at the realization. What is it? Jacob asked, noticing her stillness. I am happy, she said wonderingly. Right now, in this moment, I am actually happy. I have not felt that way since before Thomas died. Jacob set down his own handful of seeds and looked at her with such warmth that she felt her breath catch. You deserve to be happy, Sarah. You deserve to have good things in your life. So do you, she said softly. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, and Sarah felt something shift between them, the acknowledgement of an attraction that had been building since the first day he rode up to her dying garden. But Jacob looked away first, clearing his throat and going back to his planting, and Sarah felt both relief and disappointment. She was not ready, she told herself. It was too soon. Thomas had only been dead 8 months. What would people think? But even as she catalogued all the reasons she should not be feeling this way about Jacob Wilder, her heart refused to listen. The seeds sprouted within days, green shoots pushing up through the dark earth with an eagerness that made Sarah's heart sing. She tended them carefully, watering them in the early morning and evening when the sun was less brutal, pulling any weeds that dared show themselves. Jacob came less frequently now, his work at the Double R demanding more of his time as they prepared for the fall cattle drive. But he still found time to stop by every few days to check on the garden's progress. You have a gift for this, he told her one evening as they walked between the rows of thriving plants. Tomatoes were setting fruit, beans climbed the stakes she had fashioned from cottonwood branches, squash vines spread their broad leaves across the ground. Everything looks beautiful. I had a good teacher, Sarah said, bumping his shoulder gently with her own. The casual touch felt natural now, after weeks of working side by side. She had grown comfortable with his presence in a way that surprised her, the way he filled up the lonely spaces in her life without crowding her. Sarah, Jacob said, his voice suddenly serious. I need to tell you something. The Double R is sending a crew to drive cattle to market in Colorado. They want me to go as one of the trail bosses. It is good money, probably 3 months' wages for 2 months of work, but it means I will be gone until at least mid-November. Sarah felt her stomach drop, but she kept her voice steady. That is wonderful, Jacob. You should go. That kind of money could set you up well. I do not want to leave you here alone, he said, stopping to face her. Especially not with winter coming. What if something happens? What if you need help? I will be fine, she assured him, even though the thought of not seeing him for 2 months felt like a physical ache. I have managed this long, and the garden is established now. I can handle it. I know you can, he said. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, but that does not mean I do not worry about you. They were standing close enough that Sarah could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, could smell the sun and sage scent of him. I will worry about you too, she admitted. Trail drives are dangerous, Sarah. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. When I get back, I would like to court you proper. With your permission. I know it has not been long since you lost Thomas, and if you need more time, I understand. But I need you to know that these past weeks with you have been the happiest I have had in years. You have become important to me, more important than I probably should admit. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. You have become important to me too, she said. And yes, when you get back, I would like that very much. I would like to see where this goes between us. Jacob smiled then, a full genuine smile that transformed his face, and Sarah found herself smiling back, feeling young and hopeful in a way she thought she had lost forever. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and kissed her forehead with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. I will come back, he promised. Nothing will stop me from coming back to you. The cattle drive left 2 days later, and Sarah stood on her porch watching the dust cloud on the eastern horizon that marked their passing, one hand pressed against her heart. The house felt emptier than it had before Jacob had come into her life, but she refused to let herself sink into melancholy. She had work to do. The garden flourished, producing more vegetables than Sarah could use herself, and she began making trips to town twice a week, selling her produce to the mercantile and to individual families. The money was not much, but it was steady, and for the first time since Thomas died, she began to feel like she might actually be able to keep the homestead. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the mercantile with her husband, noticed the change in Sarah immediately. You look well, she said one morning as she inspected Sarah's basket of tomatoes and squash. Better than I have seen you look in a long time. I feel well, Sarah admitted. The garden has made all the difference, having a purpose again, something to work toward. I heard a certain cowboy has been spending time out at your place, Mrs. Henderson said with a knowing smile. Jacob Wilder, he is a good man, that one, quiet but solid, the kind you can depend on. Sarah felt her cheeks heat. He helped me get the garden started, yes, he has been very kind. Kind, Mrs. Henderson repeated with a chuckle. Well, kind is a start, I suppose, but I see the way your face lights up when you talk about him, girl. That is more than just gratitude for help with a garden. Sarah could not deny it, so she did not try. He is on the cattle drive to Colorado. He will be gone until November. And you are counting the days until he gets back, Mrs. Henderson said. It was not a question. That is good, Sarah. Thomas was a fine man, God rest him, but you are young and you have a lot of life ahead of you. You deserve to find happiness again. The words settled something in Sarah's chest, permission she had not realized she needed. Thank you, she said softly. October brought cooler weather and occasional rain, which made the garden explode with new growth. Sarah was working from dawn to dusk, harvesting and selling, putting away every penny she earned. She bought better feed for her chickens, and they began laying regularly again. She patched the roof of her house and bought fabric to make new curtains. Small improvements, but each one made her feel more secure, more capable. She thought about Jacob constantly, wondering where he was, if he was safe, if he was thinking about her the way she thought about him. At night, lying in her bed, she let herself imagine what it would be like when he came back, how it would feel to see him riding up to her house again. She imagined them courting properly, him taking her to dances in town, them sitting on her porch in the evening talking about their days. She imagined, though she felt guilty about it, what it might be like to kiss him, really kiss him, not just the chaste brush of lips against her forehead. She was falling in love with him, she realized. Maybe had been falling in love with him since that first day when he knelt in her dead garden and told her she could start fresh. The realization did not frighten her as much as she thought it would. Instead, it felt right, like a plant finally getting enough water and sun to flourish. November came with frost warnings and shorter days. Sarah harvested the last of her vegetables and sold them, making a final tally of what she had earned. It was enough to pay her land taxes for the year and have money left over to see her through the winter. She could hardly believe it. 3 months ago, she had been on the edge of losing everything, and now she was secure. But Jacob was not back yet, and worry began to gnaw at her. Trail drives could be delayed by weather, by stampedes, by any number of disasters. Men died on trail drives. The thought made her stomach clench with fear. Then, on a cold morning in mid-November, she heard a horse approaching and looked up from feeding her chickens to see Jacob riding toward her house. Thinner than when he had left, his face weathered and tired, but whole and alive and here. Sarah dropped the bucket of feed and ran to meet him, not caring how it looked, not caring about anything except the fact that he had come back like he promised. Jacob dismounted quickly and caught her as she threw herself into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "I am here," he murmured into her hair. "I am here, Sarah. I am sorry it took so long. We ran into weather in Colorado and had to wait it out." "I was so worried," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I was terrified something had happened to you." "Nothing could keep me from coming back to you," he said, pulling back just enough to look down at her face. "I thought about you every single day, about your garden, about your smile, about the way you look in the morning light when you are working. I thought about how much I wanted to come home to you. You are here now," Sarah said, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble of his beard, the solid reality of him. "That is what matters." "I need to ask you something," Jacob said, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I need to know if what you said before I left, about wanting to see where this goes between us, if that is still true. Because, Sarah, I am in love with you. I think I have been since the day I first saw you crying over that dead garden and wanted nothing more than to make things better for you. And if you will have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making things better for you, growing things with you, building a life with you." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I am in love with you too, Jacob. I want all of those things. I want everything with you." He kissed her then, really kissed her, and it was everything Sarah had imagined and more. It was gentle and fierce at the same time, full of promise and longing and hope. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Jacob pressed his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you," he said. "As soon as you are ready. I have money saved from the drive, enough to buy cattle and start building a real herd. We could make this homestead into everything Thomas dreamed of together. Or if you would rather go somewhere else, start fresh somewhere new, I will go wherever you want to go. I just want to be with you." "I want to stay here," Sarah said. "I want to build something here with you. And yes, I want to marry you soon. I do not want to wait." "Are you sure?" Jacob asked, searching her face. "I do not want you to feel rushed. If you need more time to grieve Thomas, I will wait as long as you need." "I will always love Thomas for what we had together," Sarah said honestly. "But he is gone, and I am here, and so are you. And what I feel for you does not diminish what I felt for him. It is just different. It is new. And I do not want to waste any more time being afraid to reach for happiness when it is right in front of me." Jacob kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "Then let us go into town tomorrow and talk to the preacher. We can be married before the month is out if you want." They were married 3 weeks later, on a cold December morning with snow threatening in the dark clouds overhead. Mrs. Henderson stood up as Sarah's witness, and the foreman from the Double R stood up for Jacob. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Jacob kissed her in front of the small congregation, Sarah felt like the luckiest woman in the New Mexico territory. They had a small celebration at the mercantile afterward, with cake Mrs. Henderson had made and coffee so strong it could wake the dead. Sarah wore a dress she had made herself from the blue calico fabric Jacob had bought her as a wedding gift, and she felt beautiful in it, felt beautiful in the way Jacob looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. That night, in the house that was now theirs together, Jacob built up the fire while Sarah made dinner, and they ate by lamplight, talking and laughing like they had done so many times before. But now with the added comfort of knowing this was forever. This was their life together. When they went to bed, Jacob held her close and they discovered each other with tenderness and patience, and Sarah felt like she was finally, completely home. Winter settled in hard after that, with snowstorms that kept them close to the house for days at a time. But Sarah did not mind. She had Jacob, and they spent the long dark evenings planning for spring, for the garden they would plant together, for the cattle they would buy with Jacob's savings, for the life they were building. Jacob proved to be good at more than just cowboying and gardening. He could fix anything that broke, could hunt and bring home meat for their table, could make Sarah laugh with his dry humor and his stories from his years working ranches across the West. He was patient and kind and steady, everything Sarah needed, and she fell more in love with him every single day. In late January, the Double R offered Jacob a position as ranch manager, a job that would pay better and allow him to be home every night instead of riding the range for weeks at a time. He accepted immediately, not even needing to discuss it with Sarah, though he did anyway, because they made decisions together now. "This means we will have steady income," Jacob explained as they lay in bed that night, Sarah's head on his chest, his fingers trailing through her unbound hair. "And I will be here to help with the homestead to build up our own herd. In a few years, if everything goes well, maybe we can buy the land adjoining yours, expand." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah murmured, tracing lazy patterns on his chest. "But Jacob, I need to tell you something." He tensed slightly beneath her. "What is it? Are you unhappy?" "No," she said quickly, rising up on her elbow to look at him. "No, not at all. I am happier than I ever thought I could be. It is just that I think I might be pregnant." Jacob stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "I think so," Sarah said. "It is still early and I did not want to say anything until I was more certain, but yes, I am fairly sure." Jacob sat up suddenly, pulling her with him, and kissed her soundly. "That is the best news I have ever received," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A baby, our baby. Sarah, I am going to be a father." "Are you happy about it?" Sarah asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Jacob said. "I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am more excited than I have ever been about anything. We are going to be a family, Sarah. A real family." They held each other for a long time, and Sarah felt such profound gratitude for the way her life had turned around. A year ago, she had been alone and struggling, watching everything she cared about die. Now she had a husband she loved, a baby on the way, and a future that looked bright and full of possibility. Spring came with a rush of green across the brown landscape, and Sarah and Jacob planted their garden together, this time expanding it even further. Sarah's pregnancy was progressing well, though the morning sickness made her queasy for the first few months. Jacob was attentive and protective, taking on more of the heavy work and insisting Sarah rest when she needed to. The garden flourished even more than it had the previous year, and Sarah continued selling vegetables to the mercantile and to the nearby ranches. With Jacob's steady income from the Double R and the money from the garden, they were able to buy a small herd of cattle, just 10 head to start, but it was a beginning. In late summer, as Sarah's belly grew round and full, they built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more rooms, one for the baby and one that could serve as a guest room or a second child's room later. Jacob did most of the work himself, with occasional help from some of the ranch hands from the Double R, and Sarah watched the house grow with wonder, amazed at what they were creating together. "Thomas would have loved this," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "Seeing this place become what he dreamed it could be, I hope you do not mind me saying that." "I do not mind," Jacob said, his arm around her shoulders. "He was part of your life, part of what brought you to this place. I am grateful to him for that. And I like to think he would be happy knowing you are loved and cared for, that his dream is coming true even if he is not here to see it." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the baby kick beneath her hand. "I am so lucky to have found you," she said softly. "Or rather, that you found me. We found each other," Jacob corrected, "and I am the lucky one." Their son was born in October, just as the garden was yielding its final harvest. Sarah labored for 12 hours with Mrs. Henderson attending as midwife, and Jacob pacing anxiously in the other room. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Jacob came in to find Sarah exhausted but glowing, cradling their son against her chest. "We have a son," she said, tears running down her face. "Jacob, we have a beautiful son." Jacob knelt beside the bed, looking down at the tiny face of his child with an expression of such love and awe that Sarah felt her heart might burst. "He is perfect," Jacob whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Sarah, thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas Jacob, honoring both the man who had built the foundation of the homestead and the man who had brought it to life again. Little Thomas was a good baby, strong and healthy, and Sarah marveled at the way Jacob took to fatherhood, so gentle and patient with their son, so willing to wake in the night to help with feedings and changings. The next few years passed in a blur of work and growth and happiness. The homestead expanded, their herd grew, the garden produced bountifully each year. They added chickens and pigs, bought a milk cow, built a proper barn. Sarah gave birth to a daughter 2 years after Thomas was born, a little girl they named Rose after Jacob's mother, and then another son 2 years after that, whom they called Michael. Jacob proved to be an excellent ranch manager for the Double R, and his reputation grew throughout the territory as a man who was fair and knowledgeable and good with both cattle and people. But he never let his work take him away from his family for long, always making time to help Sarah with the garden, to play with the children, to sit with her in the evenings and talk about their day. Sarah flourished in ways she never had before. She was not just surviving anymore but truly living, building something meaningful with the man she loved. She taught her children to tend the garden, passing on the knowledge Jacob had taught her, watching them learn to read the land and understand the cycles of growth and harvest. The garden that had started as a symbol of her desperation and loss had become a symbol of hope and renewal, a place where life flourished, where her children played and learned, where she and Jacob worked side by side building the life they had dreamed of. Every year when she planted seeds in that rich, dark soil, Sarah remembered the day Jacob had ridden up to find her crying over her dead garden, remembered how he had seen what she needed, and had given it to her without asking for anything in return. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Sarah out to the garden in the early morning before the children were awake. It was spring, and the garden was just beginning to show the green shoots of new growth. They walked between the rows hand in hand, and Jacob stopped in the center of the garden, turning to face her. "I was thinking about the day we met," he said. "About how I almost did not stop, almost just kept riding because I thought maybe you would not want a stranger interfering in your grief. But something told me to stop, to offer help." "I am so glad you listened to that something," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "So am I," Jacob said, "because everything good in my life has come from that decision. You, our children, this place we have built together." I want you to know that I do not take any of it for granted. I wake up grateful every single day that I get to live this life with you." "You saved me," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was drowning and you threw me a lifeline. You showed me that it was possible to start again, to plant new seeds in new ground and watch beautiful things grow." "We saved each other," Jacob said, pulling her close. "And we have built something beautiful not just in this garden or on this land, but in our life together. I love you, Sarah. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Sarah said, and kissed him there in the garden, surrounded by the green, growing things they had planted together, the morning sun warm on their faces and the future stretching out before them full of promise. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Droughts came and they weathered them together, knowing now how to work with the land to coax life from even the driest soil. The children grew tall and strong, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of watching things grow. Thomas grew into a serious young man with his father's steady nature and his mother's determination. Rose was spirited and clever, with a gift for working with animals. Michael was the dreamer, always asking questions, always wondering what lay beyond the horizon. Jacob eventually left his position at the Double R to focus entirely on their own ranch, which had grown to several hundred head of cattle and stretched across 2,000 acres. They were successful by any measure, respected in the community, their home always open to neighbors who needed help or just wanted company, but success had not changed them. Jacob still rose early every morning to check on the garden, still worked beside Sarah planting and harvesting. Sarah still took pride in her vegetables, still sold them in town, though now she did it as much for the joy of it as for the income. They had not forgotten where they started, had not forgotten the lesson of the dead garden and the new ground plowed beside it. When Thomas, their eldest, turned 18, he fell in love with a girl from town, the schoolteacher's daughter, and asked for his parents' blessing to marry her. Sarah and Jacob gave it gladly, seeing in their son's eyes the same love and commitment they felt for each other. The wedding was held at the homestead, in the yard beside the garden, and Sarah cried happy tears watching her son promise his life to the woman he loved. "We are getting old," she said to Jacob that night as they prepared for bed, their house quiet now that all the guests had gone home. "Speak for yourself," Jacob said with a grin, pulling her into his arms. "I still feel like that young cowboy who rode up to your house and was so captivated by you that I offered to plow your garden just to have an excuse to see you again." "You did not," Sarah said, laughing. "You helped me because you are a good man with a kind heart." "That too," Jacob admitted, "but mostly I wanted to spend time with you. I knew from the first moment I saw you that you were special, that you were someone I wanted to know better. And I have spent the last 20 years learning you, and I still find new things to love every single day." Sarah kissed him, deep and slow, the kiss of two people who had built a life together and knew each other completely. "I am so grateful for you," she murmured against his lips. "For everything we have created together." "We have had a good life," Jacob agreed, "and we are not done yet. I plan on having many more years with you, many more gardens planted, many more grandchildren to spoil." And they did have exactly that. Rose married a young rancher from a neighboring property and gave them 3 grandchildren. Michael eventually went east to study, but came back to help run the family ranch, bringing with him a wife he had met at university. Thomas and his wife built a house on the far edge of the property and started their own family, working the land alongside Jacob and Sarah. The homestead became a gathering place for family, for celebrations and holidays, for the simple pleasure of being together. The garden remained at the heart of it all, a reminder of where they had started, of the seeds that had been planted not just in the soil but in their hearts. Sarah and Jacob grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming gnarled with arthritis, but their love never diminished. They still walked the garden every morning, still worked side by side when they were able, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set over the land, they had built their life upon. On a warm spring evening when Sarah was 71 and Jacob was 73, they sat together on that same porch, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, watching the younger generation plant the garden for another season. Sarah leaned against Jacob's shoulder, his arm around her just like it had been for 50 years. "Do you remember the day we met?" Sarah asked, though she knew he did. They had told the story countless times to their children and grandchildren, the story of the dead garden and the cowboy who had plowed new ground and planted seeds beside her. "Every detail," Jacob said softly. "The way you looked up at me with tears on your face, the way the sun caught in your hair, the way I knew in that instant that my life was about to change forever." "You saved me," Sarah said, the same words she had spoken on their 10th anniversary and many times since. "We saved each other," Jacob replied, the same response he always gave. "And we built something beautiful together." Sarah watched their grandchildren laughing as they worked in the garden, watched her children teaching them just as she and Jacob had taught them, and felt a profound sense of peace. This was legacy, she thought. Not just the land or the house or the cattle, but the love that had been planted and tended and had grown into something that would continue long after she and Jacob were gone. "I love you," she said, turning to look at Jacob's weathered face, still seeing the young cowboy who had offered her hope when she had none. "I love you too," Jacob said, and kissed her forehead just like he had that first time, tender and reverent and full of promise. Always and forever. As the sun set over the New Mexico territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah and Jacob sat together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built from seeds planted in new ground, their love a garden that had flourished for 50 years and would continue to bloom in the generations that followed. The dead garden of her grief had become a testament to hope, to second chances, to the power of love and hard work, to transform even the most barren ground into something beautiful and lasting. And Sarah knew, with absolute certainty, that she had been given the greatest gift any person could receive, a love that had endured through all seasons, a partner who had walked beside her through every triumph and trial, and a life well lived on the land they both loved.